Hello and welcome to Analysis with me, Jonathan Steele. Leaders of the UK's established parties have been left reeling from the political breakthrough of the UK Independence Party in last week's local and European elections. UKIP's success in the European polls, the first national election victory in the UK by a non-mainstream party in over a century, has triggered a combination of responses from the media and politicians. UKIP itself proclaimed it has caused an earthquake in British politics. At 27% of the vote, against 25% and 24% for Labour and the Conservatives respectively in the European election, this represents a serious breakthrough for the party. While the Liberal Democrats, one time a party of protest, now in government, slumped to 7% behind the Green Party. However, the UKIP rise was not uniform across the country. In London and other major cities in particular, UKIP performed substantially more weakly than in the UK as a whole. Many commentators saying that that was in part down to the diversity of London, which meant that UKIP arguments on immigration were not quite as powerful as elsewhere. So is UKIP's success really as seismic as Nigel Farage, their leader, would like us to believe? And how should the other parties react? Joining me in the studio to discuss all this are John Palmer, former European editor of The Guardian, Andrew Slaughter, Labour MP for Hammersmith and Shadow Justice Minister. On Skype, we're joined by Amjad Bashir, who is an MEP from UKIP, representing Yorkshire and Humberside, and on the phone, Catherine Bearder, who's a Liberal Democrat MEP for the South East region of Britain, and the only remaining Liberal Democrat in the European Parliament now. Welcome to you all. But first, let's have a look at this video report.
After much talk of earthquakes and people's armies, the European elections reaped a swell of support for Nigel Farage's UK Independence Party. His campaign, which focused solely on the issues of Europe and immigration, has resonated with large parts of the electorate, allowing them to top the poll with over 27% of the vote. In his victory speech, Farage said that these issues would still be of serious concern to voters in the general election next year.
UKIP is criticised quite heavily for focusing on Europe and immigration, but I'll make a prediction. I think the immigration issue will be even bigger in next year's general election than it was in the European elections this year, and that is because the Eurozone in the Mediterranean has now got into deflation. We have youth unemployment rates of approaching 60% in two of those countries, and frankly, what would you do if you were a young man or woman living in those countries? Well, you'd come to the one country that thankfully had the common sense not to join the euro.
UKIP's controversial and provocative campaign was centred around the claim by the party that the UK cannot control its immigration policy while it is a member of the European Union, with its campaign posters highlighting the threat that it claimed uncontrolled immigration poses to the country. Many politicians and commentators have labelled them racist, a charge that Nigel Farage rejected throughout the campaign.
Those posters were designed to be hard-hitting and provocative and to get people talking and debating about what's going on, and that's exactly what they did. But they were nothing more than a harsh reflection of the reality that faces the lives of millions of families in this country.
Despite the shock of UKIP's victory, turnout in these elections was low at 34%. And beyond those animated by politics or the issues the parties were putting forward, few in the wider public were interested in the vote.
We don't know nothing about it. If we're British, we don't know nothing that's going on in Europe. We're just part of it, but we really don't know, do we?
In terms of people's engagement in what's happening in Europe, there isn't enough sort of transparency within what happens in Brussels to how it relates to people's lives here.
Many, though, feel that this election cycle shows a potentially fundamental shift by the British electorate, one that may have cultural as well as political consequences. Political expert Dr. Matthew Goodwin says UKIP is a challenge to traditional ideas of racism and prejudice.
I think that this is very revealing in itself in terms of how a mature, multicultural society deals with a radical right insurgent. Are we, is this all we have? That we just scream racist and hope it goes away? Or are we going to follow our French and our Austrian and our Italian counterparts who have been debating this for 20 years as they've dealt with the rise of the radical right and have largely moved on to more interesting debates? Why are these left behind groups feeling so disillusioned and angry about the direction of our society? How can we reconnect them?
After the rise of UKIP and a growing anti-immigration, anti-establishment feeling in the UK, Deep questions have been raised for the main parties about how they would respond to the challenge. The Prime Minister David Cameron has reiterated his call for a referendum in 2017, if he wins the majority next year. Meanwhile, Labour leader Ed Miliband said that the result reflected a deep sense of discontent with the way the country was being run, and pledged to help ordinary people on issues like the cost of living. The Liberal Democrat leader Nick Clegg, who lost all but one of his MEPs, following a spirited campaign as the self-proclaimed party of In, said that despite the heavy losses that his party suffered, they stood up for what they believed in. The rise in UKIP has exposed some deep divisions in society, but whether any political party will be able to bridge these divides is much harder to see. Nathaniel Amos-Sanson, Islam Channel.
Well, Andy Slaughter, let me come to you as MP for the Labour Party. I mean, there seems to be a debate going on within your party as whether you should now attack UKIP. And Tony Blair just called them, set up behind their facade. There's some pretty nasty and unpleasant things there. Or should you be much more low-key and respond to their demands in the way that Ed Miliband seems to be doing? Which is the right approach?
I think we're right to be worried about the rise of UKIP. They got a substantial vote. They are a nasty party. We've seen that from the number of UKIP candidates and indeed elected councillors who've made racist or Islamophobic, homophobic comments. They are a party on the radical right, and I think we should take that seriously. But I don't think we should panic, because this has been a perfect storm, really, a combination of a big protest vote. Perhaps the Liberal Democrats, the reason they've been annihilated is that they used to be the protest party. A lot of that's gone to UKIP. A lot of Conservative votes have gone to UKIP. And I think also we've had a relentless campaign over years on exactly the two issues which UKIP trumpets, immigration and anti-Europeanism, from the large parts of the media, and that's all come together. I think the bubble will be pricked, but that doesn't mean that we don't have to take seriously both the immediate threat they pose and some of the very nasty parts of, I wouldn't describe it as a racist party, but it's brimful of racist, Islamophobic and homophobic people, and more of them are coming out of the woodwork every day.
Well, Catherine Bearder, I mean, you're the lone MEP from the Lib Dems now in the European Parliament. I mean, how has this happened? What did the Lib Dems do wrong?
Well, I think European elections are always seen as an opportunity to have a kick at people that you don't like, and that's usually the government. We've got now a coalition that's unusual, and we're the smallest party, so we're going to get the double kicking for going into government, and B, being the smallest one, so. But it's also a combination of things. You heard in your videotape there, people don't know what happens in Europe, and that's a failure for all of us to have reported back. It's a failure of education. Nobody teaches about the European Union and how it functions. 60% of the UK population did not vote, more than 60%. And that, I think, is the worst fact of the night, because democracy is terribly fragile, and we know that from around the world. And if people are disengaged with it, then it's seriously in trouble. So I think it's Lib Dems have got to look at the message we were sent and to see how we campaigned and what that means for us. But I think we all need to look at how healthy our democracy is here in the UK, and that allows, as Andrew said, a nasty party like UKIP to have got such a big vote.
Well, Amjad Bashir, you represent UKIP in the European Parliament now. I mean, how do you explain the paradox that in the big cities of Britain, where there are many immigrants and many people living with immigrants, beside immigrants, neighbours of immigrants, you did actually rather badly?
It's a bit rich for nasty, toxic Tony Blair to be talking about other people, bona fide parties who've won a democratic election in which they've secured a sizable majority. They've actually caused an earthquake. It's taken 100 years in which Labour and Conservatives have had to lose an election. We've beaten them. It's several decades ago that the opposition, which is now the Labour Party, has not secured a win in Europe. decades.
Sorry to interrupt you, but that wasn't my question. My question was, why didn't you do better in the conurbations where immigrants live and people live next to immigrants? And that was one of your policies, that you said people were against immigration.
Jonathan, a lot of sweeping statements have been made by the other panelists, which I'd like to address before I go on to that. It's not right that people sling these statements and accusations. We've put up with it for long now, 2-3 years I've witnessed this, mudslinging, etc. And we've gone to the highest court of the land, the People's Court, and we've been proven not guilty. Democratically, we won an election. If you're saying that we're racist, then all those people who voted for us subscribe to racism. You're liars and you've lost an election. We're not racist. Here I am, of Asian extraction, I'm Muslim, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, right? And I've been selected and elected by this party. That dispels all your accusations. You're clearly wrong. Now, come to the question that you posed to me about the metropoles. Let me tell you this. London is unique. London is the #1 city of the world, and I'm very glad of it. I'm a proud Britisher. Now, London is doing okay. It's in a bubble. It's escaping the recession. Properties are booming. And on the ground, we haven't got the infrastructure. London is different from the country, whereas every other constituency, there were 3 people standing for councils. We were only able to put out just 1. So we were underrepresented in London. We will do a lot better in the future. But look at Yorkshire. I got over 400,000 votes, right? Therefore, we secured not 1, not 2, but 3 MEPs in this region.
All right, okay. I think you made your point, but I'll give Andrew Slaughter in a minute to come back and respond to what you've said about London, and also accusing him of being a liar and other Labour Party people who call you racist being liars. But let me first come to John Palmer. I mean, John, the media have tended to say that this result in the local elections have been worse for Labour than for the Tories. Do you agree with that analysis?
Well, I think there's arguments on both sides. Certainly the gap between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party is very fragile indeed, 2% of that order. On the other hand, an analysis of seats that are won in elections in swing constituencies, i.e. the crucial battleground constituencies, indicate a Labour lead of about 12%. So you could argue it both ways, but I agree with our contributor from UKIP only on one point, that these results, in part, are a reflection of the fact that there are certain areas of the country, important areas of the country, both urban and rural, which have frankly been increasingly disregarded by the established parties. Why? Because the battleground has been obsessively for middle ground opinion, the swing voters. And politics has largely driven into the same telephone box all the major political parties, in the perception of many voters. And I think that has been exploited. That political vacuum has been exploited by the extreme right. And I'm sorry about Mr. Bashir, but he's in a party where we know from statements by UKIP members that they are deeply Islamophobic, some of them anti-Semitic, and most of them extremely xenophobic. So I say good luck to him in that party, but he'd need to watch his back. I think that the future will lie in addressing the underlying problems that people feel have been ignored. And it's not so much the big question of immigration, it is about the lack of infrastructure to handle immigration, schools, roads, hospitals, etc. By the way, without the immigrants, half of them wouldn't be able to function. But there has been a collapse of investment in those areas, and I think that has led to this political vacuum which the hard right are now exploiting in a demagogic fashion.
Well, Andrew, do you want to come back on the point of London? He says, UKIP man says that it's because they didn't have very many candidates in London, that's why they didn't do well.
Yeah, I think it's significant, Jonathan, that Mr Bashir couldn't answer your question about why, somewhere like my constituency, where UKIP got about 7% of the vote, which is a completely integrated area where I have 100 languages spoken, where the experience of the indigenous population is of living every day in a multicultural, multiracial community. They utterly reject UKIP. The place where UKIP has done well is where the message of fear and hatred, which they, supported by some elements of the right-wing press, spread. I'm afraid it's not just an isolated example. Yesterday, a UKIP councillor was suspended for calling African migrants scoundrels. On Thursday, a candidate was revealed as having said that anyone who doesn't fear Islam is a fool. We've had people who've been insulting Lenny Henry and telling him to go to a black country. One called for Pakistan to be nuked. One compared Islam to the Third Reich. This is appalling and disgusting people, and in some cases they haven't been censored. In some cases they've been suspended. In some cases they haven't been censored by UKIP. I think they are a dangerous party, but I think there's a large element. I don't for a moment think the majority of people who voted for UKIP would support those sort of views at all. This is largely a protest vote, but I'm afraid where I think there is consensus is we have to do more. We have to do more to address the genuine concerns that people have. Again, Mr Bashir knows nothing about London if he thinks it's a wonderfully wealthy area. He should come to my constituency to Shepherd's Bush and see what's happening there. Yes, that's why Miliband's got the right message in terms of cost of living. That's why Labour did very well, and it's the coalition parties, I'm afraid, that did badly here, particularly the Lib Dems, who now seem to have imploded.
Well, Andrew Bashir, let's come back on that. I mean, you have no policies, do you, other than get out of Europe and stop immigration? I mean, what are you doing about schools, hospitals and so on? Aren't you really quite a Thatcherite, right-wing Conservative Party?
Well, absolutely not. We've attracted votes across the northern part of England, which is a very traditional Labour area. We've successive by-elections, whether it's been Wythenshawe Sale, Labour Heartland, whether it's been Barnsley, whether it's been Rotherham, whether it's been Sunderland, we've consistently come second. The Tories are nowhere to be seen. In a place, a town like Rotherham, we've just won 10 councillors. We're the largest opposition there, and we will elect an MP there next year when the general elections come. That dispels your theory that we're an extreme right-wing group. We're not. We appeal to the Labour voter and the Conservative voter. We have policies across the board. You, the media, have not been interested. You've just been focusing on our immigration policy, which is sound, which says a points-based system, which says that Europe actually participates in discrimination, because anybody from Europe, 485 million people, are eligible to come to this country, whereas anybody other than that, even our good friends from the Commonwealth, have to go through hoops to get in. So that is discriminatory. What we're saying is people with the skills that want to come here, that can add value to themselves and our country, they're welcome.
All right. Okay. I think that's clear now. Thank you. I just want to give the Catherine Bearder from the Lib Dems another chance to come in. I mean, John Palmer made the point that established parties have sort of squeezed themselves into a telephone box. There's so little difference between them. I mean, isn't that the fate of the Lib Dems, that they don't stand for anything in a lot of people's minds because of their cohabitation with Conservatives had left them, giving up a lot of their initial manifesto policies?
No, we haven't. We've actually delivered more of our manifesto, I think, than anybody ever thought we would be able to. Including David Cameron. So I think we can stand proud with our record in government. But I would like to ask Angie, is he going to bother to come to Brussels and do the job he's been elected to? Because I, over the last 5 years, have not seen MEPs there. They don't bother to do. They have to go to Strasbourg and they have to do 50% of their vote. Otherwise, their pay is cut. So they turn up to do that and they vote no on everything. when they don't turn up in the committees, there are empty chairs that should have Brits there making decisions for the better and speaking up for the UK. They don't turn up, and somebody else is making decisions. And that's the really sad thing, that people last week voted UKIP because they didn't think it mattered. We'll send them a message, but actually the result has meant that we've got people who don't turn up, and when they do, they vote in the most nasty way.
Well, Amjad Bashir, will you respond to that? Will you turn up in Brussels? Will you attend committee meetings?
The democratic group, the European Parliament, it shouldn't be called a parliament. There are 28 commissioners making all the laws, right? That's why a lot of my colleagues have failed to turn up. They've